There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension that is vast as space and timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition.
Have trustless bridges between Ripple and these cryptocurrencies so we can process transactions between the two. And the same goes for other ledgers that are outside of the cryptocurrency world, like all of the existing centralized ledgers. We want to talk to those too. And so Codius, by having this architecture where smart programs don't have to be deterministic, so they can talk to any kind of API and they support HTTPS and so on. They can talk to these things, but they can also talk to these things over here. So we have full flexibility to build smart programs and interconnect some of these things that are happening in the space.
Yeah, so speaking of smart programs interconnecting things, you could imagine tons of possibilities. One that we like talking about is imagine an open source Spotify, where rather than it just being one company that controls access to all of these different kinds of music, you could have an open marketplace where people are interacting with it and paying the artist directly. And because if it's open source, people can develop better versions of it constantly.
In principle, you can imagine any service that's out there and have an autonomous version of that. So for example, if we take something like Uber, maybe the customers are paying the drivers directly, and there's just a service which acts as a database that you can go to find the drivers. Codius came out of certain internal use cases that we needed. So things like making GatewayD more secure by having it be distributed. Things like having a wallet that is a little bit more intelligent, like that Wizard of Oz picture. So those are all things that came up from our work on Ripple, right? So we were originally thinking about adding smart contracts functionality straight into the Ripple network, but then came up with this whole idea of having it be separate and just add value to the whole ecosystem, right? Which is a much more attractive thing for us. One of our core company values is to be inclusive. So we want to build things that are useful for people in a variety of situations. Also, to answer your question a little bit more, there's some of our enterprise customers have already asked about Codius, so we're trying to develop some of those use cases. And we're also looking into ways to make Ripple as a network more attractive to Codius, but we don't necessarily want to share those yet, so just stay tuned for that.
Also calling all enterprises and financial institutions who want to add more automaticity to their business processes. So these kind of smart programs can hold money and can help big enterprises or small ones automate different business processes in a trustworthy way.
Ledger protocol. It is a cross-ledger payment technology suite invented by the ex-CTO of Ripple and a lead software engineer there. It works similarly like the internet, with instead of information being forwarded across networks, packets of money are routed via connectors, and you have conditional transfers securing the transaction across different payment networks and an address format.
There's a lot of exciting things I think that could happen here. I mean, what's really exciting is not just the fact that you guys are a good size, but you also have a good test market because of the volume of tourism. So you can have small pilots, you can learn from the mistakes earlier on, and then as you perfect your technology or your solution, then you can go and introduce it to the masses. So one thing that I'm thinking is just around how cryptocurrency can be a point of access to people arriving here and then have it transact in the island. Because what you could do is you can actually remove credit card fees entirely, which would be huge as you do crypto to crypto transactions. And the ease of access is something that I would love to invest in, or even invite companies to come and test that out here.
Presidenta del Consejo del Banco Santander.
that tells you how much potential there is. You know, we are launching OnePayFX, which is a blockchain-based retail cross-border payment with Ripple, by the way, a US company. That's coming to the US. We're going to do Open Bank. There's a lot of things that, and we created the North America region, Mexico, US. So we're now running a lot of these businesses together. So you'll see good results in the coming years.
Just now on banks and financial institutions getting up to speed. I mean, there was a big announcement in the last 10 days about Fidelity setting up their custodial service for crypto. And what's nice is that all the custody services that were already spinning up, and now you have a giant like Fidelity step in and say, we're doing custodial services as well, which we all knew was coming. And so when you look at waves of technological innovation, right, there's usually a big build-up and education phase, and then there's more adoption. And we're very early on that in blockchain, but a lot of the institutions are now paying attention with how they're going to have to insert themselves with institutional investors. And I don't think consumer is that far off, but that's up to the institutions to decide.
Likely to see a central bank somewhere in the world, although probably not a G20 central bank, issue a retail digital currency within the next 5 years. And this is significant. We've already seen movement towards this in some parts of the world, particularly Sweden. But a new impetus has been given.
Sorry. What do you do? Sorry. Less people's work and get graffiti here. Don't you walk away from me.
Hey, fuck you.
Oh, you're a clever one. What's your name?
Oxygen, for instance, in the air would like to be next to carbon, and if they get it near each other, they snap together. If you can get it faster by heating it up somehow, some way, they come close enough to the carbon and snap in. And that gives a lot of jiggly motion, which might hit some other atoms, making those go faster so they can climb up and bump against other carbon atoms, and they jiggle and they make mothers jiggle, and you get a terrible catastrophe. That catastrophe is a fire.
companies aren't decentralized. The XRP ledger, Ripple has no legal right to control it. The code that controls how the ledger runs is run by the exchanges, power users, wallet operators. Like, we have no ability to put code in anybody else's computer. So the criticism generally comes from things like the fact that Ripple holds such a large fraction of the tokens. We're using that to pursue use cases that I don't think you could pursue with Bitcoin. There is no Ripple of Bitcoin, and there couldn't be one because the revenue model doesn't work. So I would say we're different, and we're trying to do different things that are based around that difference. And I don't see any reason why it has to be one or the other. I think there are all these different use cases being pursued. We're working on interoperability so people can use the asset that best fits their use case. There's no reason that you have to pick one or the other.
I mean, personally, I have to say I'm very impressed with how organized Ripple is, the market adoption, the penetration, how advanced you are from a technology perspective, but also enterprises being able to use it. So I'm extremely impressed with that. But at the same time, we're looking as a community to disrupt the banking institution, the financial institution, and how governments control our money. And yet, the governance model of Ripple seems to be put in a centralized manner, controlled by the few, and supported by the banking institutions, which can potentially have control over what you guys are doing.
Well, they can't control the ledger. There's no conceivable mechanism, at least not that I can think of, where they could control it. Yes, I mean, RippleNet, that thing that I showed you, is a regulated entity. It's primarily for banks and financial institutions, and they're using it inside the same regulatory framework that they're currently using. But they're settling on a digital asset that's an open platform. And the idea is that RippleNet is in service of the digital asset. Like, Ripple's revenue is not coming from banks. It's the digital asset. That's where the value is. And that's the liquidity, the pools that will be created will be accessible to anyone. Anyone can become part of them and can draw off them. I think I would be inspired by looking at what happened with the internet. Like, the internet was built by government and military. It was originally adopted by institutions. Many of them were educational institutions, but many of them were big data companies. And what happened is they built the very platform that eventually reduced their control. What you're going to see is you're going to see smaller banks cutting out larger banks as correspondents. You're going to see a democratization inside banking. And as long as you guys need to hold us accountable for this. If you see us straying from this, please, I'm not asking for a free pass. We are going to keep that XRP ledger open. It's open source. We don't have any legal rights over it. The code that enforces all the rules is run by every single participant. We can't tell them what code to run. It really is, and certainly for me personally, the vision is to build this sort of institutional payment system settling on this very open asset. And I hope that we can sort of bring that kind of disruption from the inside. I guess another model that I would look at is how digital music disrupted the music industry. That made Apple a juggernaut in the music business, but it could have been the music companies. We still would have had the same democratization of music. We still would have had, music that's easy to transfer. Digital music, the music companies couldn't have stopped digital music, but they didn't have to be destroyed by it, and Apple being the juggernaut. It's about allocation. I think forward-thinking, early adopting banks will be able to democratize banking.
So you don't think the banks can negatively, influence what Ripple is doing overall, or potentially create more tokens to dilute the value later on?
They can't create more tokens because that's enforced, as I discussed, in invariant checking. That's core enforced in the code. They could, in theory, put pressure on Ripple, but if you think about it, Ripple serves itself, and so the banks have only limited amount of pressure. They can't really act coordinated. It kind of gets to be a crazy conspiracy theory. But again, hold us accountable. Look at what we're actually doing. Look at the code we're writing, and call us on it, please. Because one of the things that keeps us honest is the fact that we couldn't get away with being dishonest. So the day we can get away with being dishonest is the day you just have to take my word for it, and I don't want to be in that position. I could charge admission for that one. One day there'll be a movie.
Tracks to you. Now you see why it is important that you recognize that all success begins with definiteness of purpose, with a clear picture in your mind of precisely what you want from life. Then Mr. Carnegie continued his speech with a description of a great universal truth which made such an impact upon my mind that I began then and there to give myself a new outlook on life, and set up for myself a goal so far above my previous achievements that it shocked my friends and relatives when they heard about it. Everyone, said Mr. Carnegie, comes to the earth plane blessed with the privilege of controlling his mind power and directing it to whatever ends he may choose. But, he continued, everyone brings over with him at birth the equivalent of 2 sealed envelopes, one of which is clearly labeled, the riches you may enjoy if you take possession of your own mind and direct it to ends of your own choice. And the other is labeled, the penalties you must pay if you neglect to take possession of your mind and direct it.
Almost every bank doing some sort of blockchain activity. So I think activities are going on everywhere, and everyone is clear that the technology is too important to ignore.
And we've seen MoneyGram, which is a global company, use it to expand their business. But as David Schwartz said, we believe that the world is bigger than just one company or one technology. And that's why we built Spring, the open platform for money.
So the rails we settled on are to enable payments everywhere, every way, for everyone. And we thought about every single one of those words, and they mean something. And I think the most important one is enable. We're not going to do everything ourselves. We're part of a community, and we're part of an ecosystem. So what we need to do is build the technology that will enable those payments for everyone. And by payments, we mean any transfer of value. That could be fiat currencies, that could be dollars and yen, it could be cryptocurrencies. We mean everything for everyone.
Fire. Our first true piece of technology. 100,000 BC, stone tools. 4,000 BC, the wheel. 9th century AD, gunpowder. 19th century, Eureka, the light bulb. 20th century, the automobile, television, nuclear weapons, spacecraft, internet.
The internet is amazing.
21st century, biotech, nanotech, fusion and fission and M theory, and that was just the first decade. We are now 3 months into the year of our Lord, 2023. At this moment in our civilization, we can create cybernetic individuals who, in just a few short years, will be completely indistinguishable from us. Which leads to an obvious conclusion. We are the gods now.
Visa's numbers is like the numbers to beat, 50,000 transactions per second. I think that is way, way lowballing it by many orders of magnitude. Cheap kind of home router can do something somewhere between 100,000 and 1 million packets per second. And that's just what you have at home. That's not commercial grade or anything. So when I think about packets per second, that's the way that I'm thinking about it. Payment latency and interledger, we're worried about the constraints of the speed of light. At a certain point, you can't move faster than, the electrons going physically from me to you.
Me to New Court, to Mr. Hardy?
Through there. You have something on your forehead.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. But I have much more to share with you. As I told you, the letter only contained a small sampling of my discoveries. You'll see I have even found a function which exactly represents the number of prime numbers less than x in the form of an infinite series.
Exactly.
Yes, I thought if we were going to publish, it should be something groundbreaking.
This is most unexpected.
Hardy, this will take a lifetime.
Maybe two.
So if we think about globalization, we think about it as a triangulation. So the triangulation is of data, the triangulation is of goods and services, and the third one is money. right? Because for any exchange to happen, underlying transfer of money is important as well. And in our mind, this is the third leg that's missing, which is the money still has huge amount of friction. If today Shantanu was to send $50 to Naveen and I was in the US and you were in India, you would actually spend much more money sending that $50. And we know it sometimes takes 3 to 5 years. You would not know what price you're paying, exactly how much in US dollar will I receive, and how much INR will get debited from you. And then the third thing, there'll be huge error rates. A lot of time it gets lost, you have to call banks. And I know, for example, you send money to your daughter in the US, and I know from personal experience and from my friends and family who move money cross-border, the plumbing is really broken. And that's what Ripple is here to fix, right?
We're going to call this the game show host problem, all right? Ben, suppose you're on a game show, and you are given a chance to choose from 3 different doors, all right? Now, behind one of the doors is a new car. Behind the other 2, goats. Which door would you choose, Ben?
Door number 1.
Door number 1. Ben chooses door number 1. All right, now, the game show host, who, by the way, knows what's behind all the other doors, decides to open another door. Let's say he chooses door number 3, behind which sits a goat. Now, Ben, game show host comes up to you and says, Ben, do you want to stay with door number 1 or go with door number 2? Now, is it in your interest to switch your choice?
Yeah.
Well, wait. Remember, the host knows where the car is, so how do you know he's not playing a trick on you, trying to use reverse psychology to get you to pick a goat?
Well, I wouldn't really care. I mean, my answer's based on statistics, based on variable change.
Variable change? Or you just asked you a simple question?
Yeah, we just changed everything.
Enlighten us.
Well, when I was originally asked to choose a door, I had a 33.3% chance of choosing right. But after he opens one of the doors and then re-offers me the choice, it's now 66.7% if I choose to switch. So yeah, I'll take door number 2, and thank you for that extra 33.3%.
Exactly. People, remember, if you don't know which door to open, always account for variable change. Now, see, most people wouldn't take the switch out of paranoia, fear, emotions. But Mr. Campbell, he kept emotions aside and let simple math get his ass into a brand new car. Which is better than that goat you've been driving around campus. All right, everybody. That's the end of the day. Thank you very much. Your graded papers are down here at the end. You can pick them up on your way out.